Welcome to the Kuadrant community call, July 30th. We have kind of a packed agenda. I'm going to be conscious of time, so I might just, stop things if I think they take too long, given the time. And I think first on the list is Rachel. Paul, I cannot share my screen. If you could share the notes, that would maybe be nice. Or maybe Rachel, you want to share something, but take it away, Rachel.
Cool. No, I have nothing to share, just the ORC. So the main thing I just want to make people aware that there's this ORC that's come about. There's a few questions that I kind of want people to maybe answer or have a think about and have their opinions on. So a few things have changed since I originally wrote that ORC. I had a conversation today with Jim that's kind of put a few questions and changed the ORC slightly, so that's been added to it. So I suppose the TLDR is I'm proposing we have a way for users to be able to configure certain parts of the observability piece that we have from a single location or with a new change, one single location, and if necessary, smaller, finer grain detail in different policies. So it's to essentially allow for a better user experience. So instead of the user having to change certain observability pieces in multiple different component CRs, they can do it from the one place for the majority of things, and that will then get populated down to said components. So the original suggestion was to have an observability CR that would have very fine-grained detail to allow users to change each component depending on what they wanted. But from feedback from Craig and then talking to Jim, a new solution is more than likely going to be a policy, observability policy instead. So the main policy would be attached at the quadrant level, and that will allow users to change depending on what they want. So for example, logging or tracing from a quadrant view, so it's all of them. And then after that, if they have more finer details or different kind of view cases for a component, they can create a policy and attach to that component instead. So there's kind of two solutions that are kind of floating about. So so the main solution that I have now in that RC is the original suggestion. But if people think that the policy one is better, I'll change the RC to reflect that. But I want to get people's opinions first on the original one in case people think that might be better. So I suppose that's kind of the plan.
Right, with the ask being for people to read it and comment.
Yep, exactly.
And if it's a policy, it would attach to the gateway, or how does that?
So it attaches to essentially the quadrant CR at the start of the quadrant level, and then that would then, depending on what the person wanted, would populate down to the right component. So via the component CR. So for you want to turn on debug logging for Authorino, or for all, you want to debug across the board for, say, something's happened in the system and you want to figure out what's going on. You would then have that at the quadrant level, and then you can, if you wanted to, change the configuration level at the component level with a new policy. But the solution is, instead of offering a very fine-grained detail to begin with, it's to go with the quadrant. Everything just goes to that what you want, versus you being able to change it at the very start, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so. Craig?
Yeah, so I know we had a good chat yesterday, Rachel. When you say the word policy there, do you mean like actual additional configuration added to the quadrant CR rather than a new resource?
So it would be added to, so it wouldn't be added to the quadrant CR, it would be added to the relevant components. So myself and Jim are chatting, we want to get rid of having the quadrant CR be super configurable. Kind of like what we were chatting about yesterday as well, with it's easier to add to an API versus trying to get rid of stuff. So it would essentially, you're changing at the component level, so you're removing the need to change at the quadrant CR, if that makes sense. Jim, chime in if I'm butchering this.
So Okay, I'm just trying to clarify a little bit. So you wouldn't be able to configure it in the Quadrant CR, and you would have to create a policy target in the. Maybe I just need to go read the RFC again, to be honest. But I would, from what's being described, I would probably think a little bit more about configuring it in the Quadrant CR and that would populate through to all the components as like you're configuring Quadrant, and then maybe if needed something additional beyond that. But I'll go read the RFC again, just to make sure I'm understanding correctly.
I think you were first.
Yeah, on the same thing actually. I'll go to the RFC and drop some comments there, but I also want to leave here, a thought that to avoid overloading the term, I would try to keep the usage of the word policy in the same sense as Gateway API describes it. It's something that augments the behavior of a resource, the policy resource targets, right? Which seems to be the case here. But in that case, then the policy resource also lacks a target, right? So it looks like it's meant to extend the quadrant custom resource, but I'm not sure. Maybe what we want to extend some individual component instead. But anyway, I would try to stick with the basic structure for a policy resource and also the convention from the name. So I would call it observability policy, and the spec would include the target ref if that's indeed what we want to convey here. On the other hand, if it's something completely different, and this is the first time I look at that RFC, to be fair, then I would avoid the usage of the word policy.
Jim?
Yes, again, like what you just said is kind of how we were thinking about it. That you could think of Quadrant CR as like a gateway or a gateway CR, and then the subcomponents below, like being routes, and we're attaching the policies to the gateway and then bring them down that way. But the thing that I want to bring up, it's very much related to this. It's also very much related to the fact that we want to get a standardized or a stable API for release. And after talking with Rachel today, we kind of came to the conclusion that the changes that were brought into the Quadrant CR from RFC 6 possibly should be ripped out of it and go with this more refined approach of targeting and action rather than trying to configure a component. So with the observability policy, you're configuring observability across the system. And then if you want to target a particular resource, you create a policy attached to that one. While currently what the RFC 6 allows you to do inside of Quadrant is configure the resources for limited or directly based on the component, but not the action that you're trying to achieve. So I'm hesitant to say that we probably should take that configuration out, but at the same time, I think it's the better thing to do. Right?
Yeah, like I think like if you're using a Quadrant CR, then you're doing something at the quadrant level. So if you want to enable logging across core quadrant at debug, whatever that means for each component, then that could be something that you express in the Quadrant CRs in log level debug that gets picked up by the quadrant operator, and it translates that in whatever way is needed to make it simple for you as a user to enable debug logging across quadrants. I think I probably would have tried to avoid expressing configuration for each individual component in there, because that starts to really expose the innards of Quadrant up into the Quadrant CR. And I also think I would avoid using the idea of policy attachment in this scenario. Policy attachment is not a simple thing already. So I'm not sure it's the right solution for configuring observability in this particular scenario. If you're configuring observability for a particular gateway, maybe. But in this situation, we control the entire system. So I think we can express it in a better way through our own existing APIs. But I'll reserve judgment because I need to go read the RFC. That's just kind of what I'm picking up from what you're saying.
Last, I want to close this. Guy, here, last.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Craig said, and I do believe that that might not be just yet the use case for policy attachment. At the same time, I can see a different use case for an observability kind of policy with policy attachment, right? So I can see, for example, different use case of an observability policy that targets, for example, an HB route, in the sense that it's the user trying to express aspects of observability scoped by the traffic that flows through that particular route. For example, I want set tracing here, this kind of stuff, right? But as for setting things across in the control plane, across the quadrant component, I agree with Craig. I also see the quadrant installation as the root of the tree. So, and we already have a resource that represents that. So I don't see why we would need to augment the behavior of that one resource with yet another one CRD.
Okay, Alex, go.
Yeah,
I want to close it.
you
We have
said
no
last
time.
one, right? Yeah, we shouldn't discuss things. Yes, to what Guy said. And now, just as an exercise for the RFC writers, let's flip the argument on its head, right? And let's say you have an observability policy that you can target towards an HTTP route, a gateway. Let's imagine how this would look like. Why wouldn't you be able to target it towards a quadrant object, right? I don't know. If it looks the same and does the same thing, would it be really bad? And from a user perspective, I agree with what Craig said, right? So policy attachment is already complex. I get that. But if you don't make it any more complex and sort of reuse it, that's actually easier now for the user because there's only one concept that they need to understand, right? And there's not this other thing that you need to understand to sort of achieve a comparable goal, but through another mean. So again, what I guess the important part is flipping the thing the other way around, right? Start from a sort of policy, observability policy that targets gateway API network objects. Maybe you can do this in a way that it could just as well be targeted towards a quadrant resource or whatever. And maybe that's not possible, right? It's just exercise for the RFC writer to resolve. I wouldn't know.
Thanks. Okay, so I would say let's continue the discussion in that pull request.
Though on that, because just to be clear, like Rachel, you said that is the initial thing on how you plan on doing this. This doesn't reflect the policy attachment stuff that we're now discussing, right? So I'm correct in saying that, right?
Yeah, so the original idea was kind of like what Guy and like Craig are saying, is that the quadrant CR is the original thing. So I originally have it that it's a separate CR, but the actual fundamental workings behind is the exact same. It just doesn't matter where you put it. So that was the original idea. And then the conversation with Jim is now the policy stuff. So the actual RFC is written mainly from the point of view of a observability CR, not an observability policy. But there's bits in there about it.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay. Let's keep moving. Guy, keeping control around time. Let's try to keep it within 10 minutes so everybody can have their.
Yeah, this is only to touch on a point that we've been discussing, especially last week. So we spent some time on conversations about how we want to enhance the current implementation of our quadrant operator controller and the whole reconciliation workflow, right? And So I've been putting some time on this, and we finally, I believe we finally have an execution plan for the next steps of the refactoring. So the changes that we need to do in the policy machinery repo and the controller package it offers, so we can try to keep all based on controller runtime. And that was after learning more about the Envoy gateway use case and how they have been leveraging controller runtime. I had a chance to chat about that with one of the core maintainers of the project and ask for their experience on controller runtime, and it was very helpful. Basically confirmed some of my suspicious on that, and also my understanding of their approach. Basically, they have one single reconciler that's not really a reconciler, but just lists all the resources from the cluster and rebuilds the state, the final state from there, patching a long-running cache of all those resources that later they have a sub-hub mechanism that basically function calls that subscribes to events on the changes on that particular cache map that they have. So it's a different approach that aims to deal with the problem of concurrency in controller runtime. Controller runtime is known not to be very good at handling concurrency. Something that that person that I spoke with confirmed. So anyway, this is only to say that we are approaching the point where we're going to have some more clarity on the plan on how to move forward from here. I'll be discussing with some of you after the Gateway API meeting today the details of that implementation plan. So anybody who wants to join, it's going to be in about a couple hours from now or so. Yep, and that's it. Just a status update.
Right. And a question, like, so you're more positive than last week on this being possible?
I am indeed. Yeah. And well, it took me a while. I mean, it's been at least 2 days straight, playing with the PCs and trying to figure out the best way to accommodate. Also, I forgot to mention, Eguski left on an email thread a very good list of good reasons, to keep leveraging controller runtime. I agree with most of them, not all of them, but I think he does have a point on many of those there. I captured some of the most important bullet points in the GitHub issue I'm using to track this work, the one that I linked in the agenda doc. So those are definitely things worth considering, right? And I would add on top of that also the fact that we do have other components that leverage controller runtime, right? For example, all the other operators right now. So we have the DNS operator, Authorino operator, limiter operator. All of those use controller runtime, even though true they do it in a way simpler fashion compared to Kuadrant operator. But still, I think it's a good thing that we keep a level of familiarity with the code for especially the common part. So people working on all those code bases, one feel it's a completely different approach once they move to working on the Kuadrant operator repo. What else? Yeah, another thing that I think is very important to highlight here. A lot of the proposal I shared last week on a very different approach for reconciliation, more based on an incremental stream of events and writing functions for those specific kinds of events. I still believe that that is a valid approach, but I have to concur with Eguski that at least by us, that is not a concept that has been battle tested yet, right? To be fair, it is the approach used by Kubernetes itself, but let's face it, Kubernetes is Kubernetes, right? We are not Kubernetes. I dare to say that the majority of the industry has been using abstractions on top of that, and the most well-known one is control runtime. So I think that's a fair point. So in cases where that stream of events, it's not entirely reliable or can be flaky or any possible reason that we've never had to deal with so far because we're using control runtime, could eventually be blowing up on our faces. So I think that's in itself, it's a good reason, for us to continue with some exploration of any possibility is still based on control runtime. And I'm happy to say that after learning more about the Envoy Gateway experience, now I see some light at the other end of the tunnel.
Cool, thanks. Hey, maybe add, like, people are asking about, can the call be recorded, and when the call, and is it in the public calendar? Maybe add the information to the notes, but maybe do it after you keep talking about the next subject. That's also yours.
Sorry, Thomas, I had to run to take the door, but I heard everything that you said. So yes, absolutely. I'll make sure that to do that.
Thanks. And you want to switch places with Craig on the scoping quadrant instances based on label selectors, or you have time to do that now, or you already opened the door? No.
No, I already did. Yeah,
Okay.
that second one. I asked a question directly to Craig on another call we had on the policy attachment one yesterday, and I was happy with your answer back then, Craig. But I want to reopen a little bit the conversation here after going back to the RFC that I mentioned, where we were proposing a way for scoping the universe of gateways in a cluster that an instance of Kuadrant should care about, right? So this is relevant because what's behind this is for the new controller based on the new topology. The idea is that we can do reconciliation based on some common root of the tree, right? And probably the Kuadrant CR is the best candidate to be in the root of that tree. And from there would be basically cascading reconciliations in all its aspects. So obviously we want to reduce, the number of objects that we need to navigate throughout that tree, right? And therefore also the number of gateways we add to the tree. So this whole thing is about how we narrow the number of gateways and or even gateway controllers that we represent in that topology that will basically guiding all the reconciliation workflow. So one idea was to work with label selectors for the gateways exposed at the level of the Kuadrant CR. And I think that is an interesting approach, a valid one. I think that's definitely helpful. Not really sure how much of our user audience will have their gateways properly labeled for when they start using Kuadrant, right? I'm thinking on a scenario where they already have a topology created on network resources, and then they want to add a Kuadrant on top of that. So that would basically be adding an extra step of, if you want to use Kuadrant, you also want to label all your gateways first. So that's one thing to keep in mind, right, for the user workflow. Another idea that came up was for the Kuadrant CR to accept a list of gateway controller names, and therefore that instance of Kuadrant would focus only on gateways being managed by those gateway controllers, right? We would start with a maximum of one gateway controller name allowed, and then evolve to, if that's something we want to do, with more gateway controllers in that list, right? Well, we need to cover that well in the documentation, to say the least, right? Because in the Gateway API group, at least, I've been seeing more and more conversation around this use case of having multiple gateway controllers running simultaneously in the same cluster, right? I don't know how much of that of a use case that is, but it is a use case, right? Maybe it's not 80% of the case, but it's something that we need to take into account. So there's a decision here to make, right? Or how we imagine this functioning for a Quadrant instance, right? So if a Quadrant names one specific gateway controller, and then we find a more complex topology of routes attached to multiple gateways, basically what we're saying here is that we're going to probably ignore all the gateways that are parents of that route, but nevertheless are not amongst the list of in the scope of that Quadrant instance, right? And therefore also not trying to create policies and configuration for our policies in those gateways, this kind of stuff. So I would like to double visit this decision or this recommendation from yesterday's call before we move forward. And probably the best way to do this is by encouraging people to go into that old RFC. It feels abandoned now. I need to review it for sure. But I found there in the conversation, the history, a comment, for example, from Iguski, suggesting that maybe we shouldn't focus on the controller name, but rather only on the gateway. By knowing the list of gateways, we should try to infer the controllers, this kind of stuff. So we don't need to decide anything now, but I just would like to kick off the conversation back again. So we think on the exact, because this has an impact on the API, on the user workflow, right? And also will be available input for the way we plan the reconciliation workflow. Yeah, Craig, go ahead.
Yeah, my initial thought here was, well, if there's two gateway controllers on the cluster and one of them's Istio and one of them's another one that we don't support, for instance, like we're kind of implicitly saying, hey, well, guess what? We can't do anything with policies with that gateway controller, right? So that list kind of already exists. It's just not written down or expressed. However, there's a little bit more complexity to it than that, because that's not entirely true, right? Because DNS and TLS policy will work with any gateway controller. So there is a little bit more complexity in it than that. So yeah, I think it is a little bit more worth a little bit more thought. I do agree with you that, at least in my head, this is like not the common use case, and I kind of wonder how much politics is being played here, where it's like, oh, we want to make sure that, like, if somebody's got one gateway controller installed, they can still install my gateway controller later on and use it, maybe migrate to it, you know? So yeah, that's just a tangential thought that I had there. But yeah, I'll have a look at that RFC as well. It's an interesting one, especially with DNS and TLS policy in the mix.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, maybe I should have listed that, but amongst the options that I can see, to try to scope the impact of a Quadrant instance, I can think the label selectors on the gateways, one. I can think on gateway classes. I think that was the original proposal that you see in the current text of the RFC, the one that Iguski criticized. And then we also have controller name. I agree with what you said, that there will always be gateway controllers that we don't support, right? Therefore, by only filtering based on by listing the gateway controllers there or not, we are already giving up on a portion of the gateways that could possibly exist in the cluster, right?
So let me ask a quick question on that. So, like, let's say there's two gateway classes in a cluster, right? And somebody tries to apply policy to something that's, let's say, on both gateways, right? Like, do they get a notification or message letting them know that, hey, this policy is not getting applied on this gateway?
Yeah, you mentioned 2 gateway classes, right? To be clear, you can have as many gateway classes as you want, so that's not really the
I'm
point.
specifically saying like there's an envoy and a non-envoy gateway.
Yeah, that would mean 2 gateway controllers, right? I mean, that's what you mean.
Okay.
Yeah, the thing that goes on top of gateway classes. And yeah, what we would do in terms of reporting the effective policy would be, these are the paths that are being protected by this particular policy, right? And the path always includes a gateway. So you would see like this gateway and this HP route or this set of HP route, they're all protected by this policy. But you would only know that another possible path that exists is not being covered by that policy by exclusion. You know what I mean? So we're not really reconciling the other.
But that seems bad, right?
Yeah. I mean, we could, if we are,
Like-
but that would mean putting all gateways in scope, even if we don't end up configuring those gateways.
I think unless a user wants to avoid seeing those, like I think it should be an explicit user action that says, ignore these gateways. You see, I know, I don't care that you're not protecting these gateways. That has to be explicit user, because I think the default assumption is if I create a policy on something, it better get protected.
I agree, and that's why I believe that gateway class it's kind of a better approach here, because as I said, you can create as many gateway classes as you want that are all watched and reconciled by the same gateway controller. So if you have envoy and another one, and you can create multiple gateway classes under envoy, and you say, these are the gateway classes that I want to be protected, right? You don't need to care about any other gateway class. And that would be explicit in the Kuadrant CI, right? I fear that the label selector approach, even though it does...
Like I'll be honest with you, like the 2 approaches to me seem equivalent. I think we should support both. Because it's a filtering mechanism. They're both used to filter what you look at. So who cares? You could add 6 more different ways to filter things.
Mm-hmm.
So like just support them all. That way a user can choose how he filters what he applies to.
Yeah.
Unless like applying the filtering is so hard. Like I think as long as you have a consistent way, okay, if they apply 2 different types of filters, this is what happens. It's basically a union of the filters. Basically you reduce even more. Like it's basically, it's like, are you doing an and or nor operation on the filtering, right?
When you say the 2 filters, you mean the label selectors one and the gateway classes? Or...
Yes.
Yeah, I do see a difference though on the label selectors in particular, because the label selector it's a Kubernetes thing, right? So
yeah. And so they get done in different ways. Exactly. Like they get one that's going to reduce your bandwidth while the other one does not, right?
Yeah, the problem with the label selector is that it risks picking up also gateways that are not supported gateway controllers.
But that's okay, because it should be like the behavior I just said right now, which is basically you should be selecting all of them right now and reporting that you're not protecting on those gateways.
We can do that.
Like if he selects things that we can't apply protections to, we just need to give him an error message that says, hey, these things are not getting protected.
Yeah, so
you know what I'm saying?
That means not narrowing the scope, which is one of the goals here, right? I mean, we try to build smaller topologies, not have to scan the entire cluster. But
yeah, I think we're mixing things that are efficiency concerns along with what is like from a user perspective, we don't want to surprise them and provide good error messages.
Mm-hmm.
And one takes precedence over the other. Like the user safety and not surprising them should be priority 1. And then we should provide them ways to like reduce, create the cluster more efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, like if you want this controller to be more efficient, you apply these filters.
Yeah.
And number 2 is like, and you don't want to get all those little error messages. We'll filter out those things that we shouldn't be applying these policies to, right?
I guess what I'm failing to say is that I believe that by adding a filter, effectively to represent a filter, the level of the Kuadrant CR, you're basically tackling both problems at once, right? Because the user would be explicitly saying, this is the scope that I care about. And therefore, you no longer need to care too much about the report and the things that the user already chose not to be in the scope. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, well, but no. What user?
Yeah, good point. The user who,
Right?
I think you
Yeah,
said-
no, I
that's
guess I
a good
understand
point.
what you're saying, but that's my point, right? What user? We're not targeting the same personas, the same user. They don't maybe even have that understanding of the whole thing. So I'm actually very much in agreement with Aaron there. Like the error reporting is what matters. And just stepping back also for a sec, right? So see, back to the comment that was made in the gateway API thing, right? What is the scariest thing that this API enables all that stuff, or that users are going to do it? Well, the API enables all that stuff, and yeah, guess what? Some random user is going to do it. I would shelf performance there. Like, if it sucks and people really have a use case to have that kind of a crazy, complicated deployment, well, that's the price you pay. Hopefully that use case will be very rare and will not be what every other users do. And if that's the case, then I think we should look at the performance aspect of that and maybe find better ways and so forth. But the thing remains, right? Like, let's use auth, my preferred one, right? Like, you want to tell the user, this is probably not protected the way you imagine it is. And you probably care about knowing this, like, reliably and very quickly.
Mhm.
So this user you're mentioning doesn't exist.
No, that's a very good point, and I think I changed my mind now. But at the same time, then if that also means we need to scan all the cluster, right? So we don't care about performance. We need to scan all the cluster. If we do, then it becomes a nice to have and no longer a must have. And I would
Yeah.
probably say, let's drop it. We don't need this now. Then.
Yeah, I think this is a performance optimization that can be done later for that, 10% use case.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. That's the end of the conversation, right? That's very clear.
Thanks.
Craig, you think you can do it in 4 minutes?
Yeah. This is more of a sharing, like different discussions that have been happening in different areas. So this one's around DNS. So whenever you're dealing with stuff that's off cluster, you can always end up accidentally leaving something behind if someone deletes the controller but doesn't delete the DNS records first, or there's situations you can get into there, or they force delete the finalizer before you get to clean up, that kind of thing. So one of the things that we identified or we were discussing today was, because we have potentially multiple controllers acting against the same zone, then it should be possible for us to identify which owners are acting against that zone and report that back in each cluster. And that should also be possible to correlate to the number of DNS records for that host, and then allow us to come up with an alert, basically to say there's probably some orphan records here that you need to clean up. Obviously, we need to actually come up with a mechanism for cleaning those up. But yeah, I just wanted to share it and see if anybody's got any interest in that area, go and have a look. But just a conversation that came up that I wanted to give more insight to a broad audience.
Thanks, Greg. Okay, we have no demos. What I did want to do, and just it's like a sort of an experiment, is just go around everybody and, like, if you have nothing to say, that's okay too, of course. But like, if there's anything you think that like you've been working on that probably half of the other people don't know about, and you're able to explain it in a phrase or in a paragraph conceptually, please do so. Because this is the only call that we're all together. Let's see. I mean, maybe it takes much too long. Maybe it's super irritating. I'm just gonna try. So bear with me. I'm just gonna start at the top of the list of the people that I can see here, and the first would be Adam. Anything you wanted to mention?
Sure. So I guess the thing I was working on last week was getting the Gateway API v1.1 types supported, and yeah, that was merged last week. Yeah, that's just a quick update from me.
Actually, maybe you can just point to the next person. That's easier than me just all the time interrupting.
Sure. I'll just go on the list then. Alex, do you want to go next?
Maybe, I don't know, like laid out the WASM stuff and what we discussed. I think to decouple how we run this, build this and run this, just have nice laid out code, and so that we can start implementing the auth in WASM. I guess that's maybe the important thing. Oh yeah, and InfiniSpan will not cut it as a Redis replacement. So that's another one. I need to pick someone. How am I supposed to do this? I've opened this list and then it's Adam. So I don't know. Well, Craig, I guess.
I was working on the boards, so I did that discussion yesterday. So we have those boards plus the docs and process. Yeah, that was, I guess, the most important thing that I was working on just over the last couple of days. I shall say, Didi.
Thanks, Greg. Basically, on just the last step of like the Helm charts integration, now on the Kuadrant operator part, already crafting an alpha 1 for 090. There's like a couple of issues with the OLM integration as well, that the validations doesn't work. And the bundle is actually failing for Althorino and Kuadrant operator. And on the other hand, I started like working on the external authorization within the WASM plugin. We had like a sync with Adam today and yesterday with Alex, that we are laying like a plan of how to make it happen. That is in the options and the steps that we're going to be following. So opening the list. Well, Guy, you already talked. So, Jim?
Sure. Reading an awful lot of the arguments that the course was given last week about controller runtime and what should and shouldn't be done there. Yeah, that's pretty much what I was focusing on, that policy machinery library, how that's working. Jason, do you want to go next?
Probably key. Yeah, sure. Things of note or interest. So we're doing some design stuff at the moment for console plugin. That's occupying most of my time. Yeah, we'll probably have some stuff to share on that probably in the next week or so as well. So we'll do that demo stuff maybe next week or something. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing that's on my radar at the moment. To pick somebody. Kevin.
Yep. So for me, I picked up adding more like gateway API client wrappers for the policy machinery repo. So yeah, that'll be adding like GRCP routes and the other gateway API clients as like things that we could add to the topology. Yeah, so I've just been mainly working on that. Phil, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm working on the Azure provider and the DNS operator. Thomas?
I'm trying to write down what you're all saying. I have nothing to say really. What to me next? I don't know where in the list you are. I think we had Rachel. No, you didn't say anything yet, no?
Mainly has been the RFC and also the design stuff with Jason for the console plugin. I think that's everybody.
I think so.
Even maybe docs.
Right.
Hey folks, yeah, well, I'm mostly working on the downstream docs. I don't know, do you want to talk about downstream docs here?
No, the word downstream is forbidden in this call.
That's what I was thinking. So yeah, I didn't say that. Okay.
No worries. Cool. Thanks. I missed some people. I'm sorry. Maybe you can have a look at the notes and add what's missing. Okay. Cool. Thanks. Actually, you still have 12 minutes left. I'm not sure.
I had one
Correct.
item to the left, Thomas.
Yeah.
Like as Adam said, right? V1.1 Gateway API support merged. Yesterday we were talking about like some process changes and releasing at the end of each iteration. Iteration is kind of starting tomorrow, sorry. So if we can do one or either. We can release now, or we can release at the end of this iteration as kind of planned. I don't have a strong opinion either way, but if others do, please let me know. And we can.
Why would we not release now?
Yeah, I mean that's why like I said, I don't have a strong opinion either way. So
let's do it then.
Any other
You want to say
opinions?
something, Didi?
Yeah, if we can actually push it for. The thing is, I would love to see the Helm integration working for the next release. And I'm actually super close. I'm testing the alpha one now. If that actually goes okay, that means that next release is going to be automated and it's going to be all working. Like famous last words, of course.
But we could still do that for the next one.
We will be releasing it at the end of the next iteration, even if we release like tomorrow. In 3 weeks we will release again, so it would be part of that straight away.
All right. All right, it's good.
All right. If there's no naysayers, we shall proceed.
Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, we could have a look at the board. I did have a look before the call. I would say there's still quite some issues that need some organizing and discussing. So I was proposing to do that, start doing that next week. And then I will also make sure that the document we have for Quadrant 1.0 is up to date with the changes we made to the downstream document. Okay. Anybody, any questions? Anybody want to open an older conversation that we already closed because I was afraid we were running out of time, or if not, 9 minutes back. Go once, go twice.
So where do we find this meeting that Guy talked about?
Right.
I've just mentioned in the Quadrant channel.
Awesome.
Yeah, but I make sure to add you to the invite.
Right. There's also the Gateway API call right after this call, actually.
Yeah.
European one. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, everybody. See you next time. Take care.
Bye.